Hello, this is Dhammamegha here with the next podcast episode for Windhorse Publications podcast. And today's a bit of a treat. Earlier this year in January, I went to go and visit Vessantara at his home. And we talked about the new edition of his classic book, Meeting the Buddhas. And perhaps we were a little bit too comfortable on a couch and armchair, respectively, because the sound quality is not as good as we had hoped. But still, I think you'll find it a really interesting conversation. We spoke about the book, of course, but more importantly, we spoke about what it is to be in relationship with these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and tantric deities through sadhana and puja and the imagination more broadly. I do hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, Vessantara.
Hello, Dhammamegha.
So I am here with Vessantara today, and Vessantara has, well, one wants to say Vessantara has authored a new book, but actually we've redone a book that you wrote many, many years ago called Meeting the Buddhas. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that today. But I'm aware that you haven't been very well. Are you feeling any better now? I'm sure that a lot of the people who know you will want to know that you're all right enough.
I'm certainly all right enough, thank you. Yeah. Energy is good. I'm back running a little bit for those who know me. So, yeah.
Good. Yeah. So the book in question is called Meeting the Buddhas, and maybe you can say a little bit about the birth of that book.
Okay, yeah. Because actually this month, January 2023, is the 30th anniversary to the month of the book being published. So it was published in 1993 and it started life really in 1987. I was living in Bukkha retreat center that we have in southern Spain. And I was leading a 3-month men's ordination course for men who were joining our order. And Sankarakshita Bhante was there. And I'd moved out to Bukkha to live a little while before. And when I wasn't leading these courses, I had quite a lot of free time. And one day I said to him, I've got all this time. I think I could write a book, but I don't know what. So he'd heard me give a lot of talks about different Buddhas and Bodhisattvas because I'd led quite a lot of previous ordination courses. And at that time, there wasn't that much information available. So on the ordination courses, we had to teach people or tell people about all the main Buddhist figures. And I'd done a lot of those, and he'd been there. So he said, well, you could write a book on Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and these different figures. So I went back to my room and I planned something out with 24 chapters, and I virtually followed it. Wow. So I spent the next 2 years at Bukkha writing the first draft of what turned into Meeting the Buddhas. And it was really one of the best bits of my life. It was fantastic because I had lots of time. Southern Spain, blue skies a lot of the time, and could meditate and just absorb myself in this extraordinary world of all these figures. And if I got stuck with the writing, I'd just go outside and walk up and down and do the mantra of whatever figure it was that I was meditating on, and something would clear and I'd go back and do the next bit. And, so it was really wonderful. I just felt as if I was absorbed into that world, and it's an extraordinary world to live in, full of richness and qualities and beauty. Yeah, really quite in the depths of our heart mind. And then it took, after that first draft, I came back to the UK because my dad was very ill, and it took a while to go through the processes of checking all my facts because I didn't have many books out there. I was really wrote mainly out of what I already knew. And it's a big beast, this book, Meeting the Buddhas. So it took a lot of tidying up and finishing, and so it finally came out 30 years ago this month.
So before we go to the new edition, how did you know so much about all of these figures? It's extraordinary to me that you were doing all of that teaching and then that writing out of what you already knew.
Well, that's a good question. I suppose from when I first learned about these figures, I'd been fascinated with them in a good way in many ways, although I think you can also get fascinated with those figures in a not quite healthy way. So I was learning about them, and then from 1974, when I was ordained by Bhante into the order, I started doing practices of those different figures. And with meeting the Buddhas, I suppose what I wanted to do, I didn't just want to convey information, I actually wanted to convey a feeling of, well, what's it like, to meet these figures? What's it like to meditate on them? What's it like to really feel their qualities? What sort of worlds do they take you into? Because it just gives you so much more sense of the potential of us as human beings. So we spend a lot of our time, walking around supermarkets and sitting, doing things on the net, and we just don't realise how extraordinary we all are when we just go into the depths of ourselves much more. So I was doing practices connected with those figures. And then I was also being Bhante's secretary for 6 years and doing those ordination courses. And basically I just read everything I could get hold of as well. We had quite a lot of books in the library that Sangharakshita had gathered over many years, which was, before the internet, was an incredible resource. But I think I was just really drawn into that world. And so, every little bit of information or each new picture or each discovery of a new figure really sort of stayed with me. And I'd had a bit of contact with Tibetan Buddhism right at the very early stages of my Dharma practice. But mainly it was what I got from Bhante and from reading. Subsequently, through various sort of ways that I wouldn't go into, I had quite a lot of contact with Tibetan teachers. But I was quite struck by actually, yes, they helped to sort of deepen my understanding, but I got a really good basis from what was already available and from Bhante, who I felt, he really understood a lot of the deeper meaning of these figures, and so he'd helped me to go really into what they were about in a deep way, because you can read information about them and that doesn't necessarily give you a feeling. In fact, it can even take you away. You just gain lots of facts about these figures, but it doesn't help you to enter the world.
It's a lovely title then, isn't it? Meeting the Buddhas. That's exactly what you were doing, the introductions.
Yes, that's it. Yes. Yeah.
So then what happened? So the book came out.
The book came out and it sold well and carried on selling well for quite a few years. And then after about 15 years, if I remember rightly, Windhorse Publications wanted to refresh it, as publishers do. So the idea they came up with was to chop it into 3 parts, because there's a whole introductory section and there's a section on different Buddha figures, and then the main Bodhisattva figures, and then the third part, which is all the figures that are more exclusively found in the sort of Buddhist Tantra. It's extraordinary kind of figures of different gurus and Dakinis and all sorts. So the book did lend itself to being chopped into 3. So we chopped it into 3, and it became 3 guides: Guide to the Buddhas, Guide to the Bodhisattvas, Guide to the Tantra deities. And it's carried on like that for about another 15 years. It's all very neat, isn't it? 30-year anniversary and 250th. And then now it's back in one. So, which I must say I'm really happy about, actually, although I could see the sense of taking it into 3 parts. It's always felt like one book to me. And I think there's a lot of crossover between the different sections. And it also works as a reference book. And if you've got all the 3 together, then it's really easy to kind of use it like that. So, yeah, I'm very happy to see it restored to its, what I think of as its former glory.
I mostly encountered I couldn't get hold of a copy of Meeting the Buddhas, of course. Unless you got a lot of money and, you couldn't,
these things go.
Yeah,
they were exclusive like that.
Exactly. But I encountered a lot of the figures that you introduce us to in this book on retreats where people would be reading things in pujas, and often sort of the words and the ways you've described things have been not just a meeting, but a sort of invocation of the figures and the quality of those figures. So that's how I kind of first encountered the book. And then when I started at Windhorse Publications, I was wandering around going, what would you like to see published? What should we be doing? And so many people were like, bring back Meeting the Buddhas. I was like,
with placards outside your office.
Exactly. It was like that. So aside from the fact that the 3 books are back into one and it's Meeting the Buddhas, what's different about this one?
Well, it's not hugely different. I thought about writing some fresh material. There were a few figures that I didn't really do justice to in the original. But then I realized actually that trying to write whole new sections, they would sort of stand out like sore thumbs because, as I say, actually, I wrote the first draft about 35 years ago. I don't write like that anymore. So I'd be trying to sort of, imitate my earlier style, and I thought it would just end up like some room where you sort of, we touched up bits of the walls, in a slightly different color, and it would just look weird. So I didn't make major changes, and actually going through it, I didn't feel like I needed to. Generally, it still felt like it stood on its own 2 feet without me giving any support. But I did go through and sort of, I suppose, I've changed quite a lot of things which don't obviously make a difference, but when you put them all together, they do. And it's things, even really small things, like, for instance, the original version talked a lot about visualizations. There were chapters about something to do with visualization, There were hundreds of visualization mentions, which gives you the idea that to really work with these figures, you've got to have a kind of clear visual imagination. And lots of people don't. And I've got some very good friends who practice with these figures really effectively and are really moved by them and clearly have been transformed by them, and they don't see much at all. So all those mentions, or the vast majority of those mentions of visualization, they all disappeared. There were things like that, and there were things about, I suppose, where my understanding of the wisdom aspect of things has changed or deepened. I've just kept changing things like that sort of through the book. So if you read it, you won't find, there's a whole different chapter or approach or anything. But I think it just works much better for, readers 30, 35 years on, because our understanding of the Dharma in the West has sort of grown a lot. And it's just, in all sorts of subtle ways, I think it's become a much better book.
Great. I keep that. It's interesting that this this book, but more than that, this whole way of engaging with and in the tradition. I see a lot of the Buddhist world at the moment is quite secularized or secularizing, and obviously there's been a lot of drawing out mindfulness and some of the other parts of the tradition in a way that's I don't know, that has utility for certain. It can be very, very helpful. But this isn't necessarily the part of the tradition that's been most easily accessible for some people, particularly kind of convert Buddhists who may have their own sense of like that have a history around religious iconography, for example, or prostration, or visualization, or things like that. And I love the way you talk in the beginning of this book about that Buddhism has this rich language of archetype and symbol. I wonder if you can just say a little bit more about what having a relationship with these figures, whether it's via sadhana or pujas or reading or imagination or having images around you, like what does this bring? Like, how does it change what we're doing?
Cool. That's a
big question.
Big question. Big question. I mean, I'm all for mindfulness, and I'm all for practices which are simple, that people can immediately pick up and work with. However, it's interesting that all these practices with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and gurus and so on developed over time in Buddhism. And some people used to think, and maybe some people still do, well, that was just a degeneration from the pure original teaching. But to my way of thinking, it was actually an enriching and a developing. As the mindfulness went deeper and deeper, we started to find that there were depths to ourselves as human beings that had all this richness, and we needed ways to contact that. And you can maybe do it, just through very simple mindfulness through the day, but these sadhanas, these practices, developed over the centuries as out of the practice and the visions and understanding of awakened people, as ways to give us doorways and portals, into these other worlds, these other dimensions of ourselves. I feel that having these kinds of practices, gives us not just messages about what it really means to be a human being, but also ways to inhabit that potential. And it's difficult if you've been, maybe you had a religious background which you then rejected. I mean, I was brought up as a Catholic, so I can speak to all that. But I think it's interesting that the sort of methods that a lot of traditional religious spiritual traditions use, they are actually quite powerful. That's why it's quite hard to sort of get out from under them if you decide that as they're being presented to you, they don't work. But I think by and large, I don't have any problem with the methods. It's very often the ways in which they get fixed and literalized. And one of the fantastic understandings of the Dharma is that all these figures that you're visualizing, they're not kind of real entities out there, which you then have to they're certainly not creating, some kind of creator out there that you have to enter into maybe a subservient kind of relationship with. It's understood that they're just expressions of our own heart mind as it starts to become more liberated. And finally, all those qualities that you visualize come back home. We discover that they're qualities that we actually, we can't say possess, because that sounds like there's an everyday me who's, owns all this stuff. But it's more like, we discover the true qualities that our minds have, and which are also the true qualities that all minds have. However much people may have wandered off from them, they're still finally available to be discovered. So, if we feel like, I've practiced as a Christian, but now I feel I've rejected all that. Yes, as soon as you come upon a puja, or as soon as you come upon some kind of devotion to a figure, all your inner protectors sort of come up and start getting very suspicious. But all those devotion and opening to different kinds of figures, they're just methods fundamentally. It's not like they're good or bad in themselves, but they are very powerful. So we just need to be quite sure, what it is that we're opening to, what we're devoted to. And once we really get the message that, yes, we're not becoming subservient to some, deity out there, but actually it's a way for us to open to the beauty of our own heart, then we can start to reclaim those methods and not be scared of using them, because they are, they're certainly powerful.
I'm tempted to ask what the nature of their potency is.
Are you tempted enough to actually ask?
Yes, I am.
Oh, right, okay. Let's see if I'm tempted to answer. What's the source of their potency, or what is it that makes these practices?
What goes on? What is it about the mind and the nature of the figures that is so moving or opening, or you keep saying that there's inherent sort of power in these methods and in the figures.
Mm-hmm. They work on a lot of different levels, these practices, from the psychological to the, I don't know what we want to call it, the sort of deep psychological archetypal level, to the wisdom insight level of things. They even work sort of like psychologically, for instance. So supposing that we take up a practice where we're visualizing some Buddha figure, and perhaps this morning as we're practicing them, we're feeling like we're a bit all over the place, we're a bit distracted, and we kind of feel like this Buddha figure is a bit disapproving, that we're not paying attention. But if you think about it, a Buddha is never disapproving. It's never, wagging your finger at you. They're not a Buddha if they're doing that. So we tend to put our own psychological qualities onto the figures, and it gives us a chance to see our psychological tendencies sort of mirrored in the figure. But it also works really sort of positively. It's like supposing that there's a figure that you visualize, and it's like in a relationship with another person, say, most of us, certainly in any kind of close or intimate relationship, we reach a point where it's a bit scary, just how open are we prepared to be? How much are we prepared to open ourselves? How much are we prepared to allow ourselves to feel loved, even? So, you get all that sort of difficult kind of emotional negotiation that goes on in relationships. You visualize a Bodhisattva or a Buddha figure or something like that. You can express as much love, devotion as you like. You're not risking anything. And equally, you can open to that tremendous love of all the Bodhisattvas, that love of all the Buddhas. You can let it right in. You can just be flooded with it like light. So it can have the practice can work on that sort of psychological level. And then the figures, they do embody quite deep sort of patterns, sort of psychological patterns, the kind of thing that sort of Jung and some of his followers have talked about, sort of more sort of archetypal levels of things. They embody all the different qualities of awakening. So whatever figure you visualize, it's free, it's loving, it's wise, it's generous, it's patient, it's playful, it's energetic, it's peaceful, all those things. So it's just a way of contacting those qualities. But what's the source of those qualities? Well, it's nowhere out there. Again, finally, we find them in ourselves, which is why with the sadhanas, sometimes you start off visualizing, or usually you start off visualizing figures external to you. But as you go on, you very often start then becoming the figure. You start to own, if you like, your own inheritance as a human being, the deep inheritance that we could have. So there's that level. But then there's also a sort of wisdom level to it. All these figures appear out of this open dimension, which is symbolized by blue sky, which is the open dimension of our own minds. It's the open dimension of all experience. When we go into any experience, however much we sort of try to fix it, we discover that there's something ungraspable about it. There's constant transformation, there's constant flow, there's constant energy. And then out of that open, free dimension, which is full of potential, it's not like a sort of dead sort of sky somewhere out beyond the asteroid belt. It's the open dimension of awareness. It's our own minds that are producing all this, which is so out of that, then all kinds of things can appear. But whatever appears is made of light. So it's as if we're being given the chance to discover, say that some beautiful Buddha or Bodhisattva figure appears, we discover that we can really enjoy and appreciate and be moved by this figure. But it's made of light. There's nothing we can ever get hold of. We can't sort of put it in our bag and sort of carry it off. There's nothing fixed, nothing, in a sense, nothing real there. So we learn to appreciate and enjoy and interact, and it's really obvious that we can't grasp. And that's the whole issue from the Buddhist point of view, is that we have all this kind of experience, and where we just enjoy and appreciate and interact, there's no problem. It's always the grasping, it's always the fixing that produces the issues. So all that time that we spend visualizing these figures, we're learning how to live in a free way. So these practices, although they seem very, sort of unusual and esoteric and so on, they're actually about how you live your life. They're about learning a way to be in the world that is free and that's wise and that's loving and compassionate.
Great. I think rereading the book and I've been on a few retreats with you as well, where you've been talking like in this way, maybe about what's going on in this relationship, if you like, is the sort of access to a deep positivity and possibility that's quite hard to get. Watching Netflix or something. It
Must
be
on
unusual.
Netflix somewhere. Surely.
Just got to get the right series.
Yeah.
No, I mean nothing against watching Netflix series,
Sure.
but there is just something so kind of next level wholesome about the qualities that you're in contact with in doing the practice, and even just reading these, or like you might poetry or looking at these images. Yeah, sort of connection with that. It's lovely. So some of the people who are listening to this won't know that you've been working on something that will turn out to a book, which may in a way turn out to be something of a companion to this book, in as much as Meeting the Buddhas is about the various figures. So do you want to say a little bit about what you've been working on?
Yes, can do. Haven't got very far, but the plan is to produce a book about sadhana from the point of view of how you set about practicing with these figures. So Meeting the Buddhas gives you the who to practice with. So a companion book would be more of the how to practice. And with each of these different figures, there will be a number of sadhanas, sort of, which lay out. First you visualize, first you do this, and then you do that, and then you visualize this, and then you recite such and such mantra. So that gives you sort of the basic information. But that really needs bringing to life. And again, Meeting the Buddhas, as well as information, I was trying to give a sense of how it is to really practice with these figures. So the aim of this second book would be to really share experience about some of the issues that come up and how you really work with these sadhanas over time. To help deepen understanding of both how they work, but also how to work them in the best of ways. And done a lot of, I've received a lot of teaching over the years on all these things, and been practicing sadhana now for almost 50 years. So hopefully we can share some experience that will be useful. And certainly, having done a lot of retreats and been asked lots of questions by an awful lot of people, I'm kind of aware of the areas that would be helpful to go into. So let's see how it goes. But that's the plan. Produce. I don't know if it will. Hopefully, it won't be quite as big a book as Meeting the Buddhas, for your sake, Dhammamegha. I think it'll be. There's quite a lot to go into, so it won't be a slim volume either.
I mean, I'm aware that you and Vijayamala did a long retreat. What year did you come back?
2011.
2011, yeah. So you went on a 3-year retreat, and obviously you've been on lots of other longish retreats, but this was a substantial one. And I'm aware that you've just been doing a lot of teaching, particularly in the order, about these kinds of practices, some of which you take on when you're ordained. You would do some forms of practice before you're ordained, and you take on some when you are ordained. So sadhana is something that you would take on in a Triratna context anyway. That's sort of how it fits in. I'm just, I'm curious about how you see your what you can offer, or what you're spending your life energy doing at the moment in terms of your writing and your teaching.
What can I say about that? Well, hopefully it all fits together. I suppose I've got, saying that I've been practicing sadhana for almost 50 years shows that where am I now, 72, and partly I'm just aware that time is running out rapidly. So my kind of priorities are to keep deepening my own practice for my benefit and others, hopefully. But also, I've been talking about wanting to empty my pockets. Mm. It's a bit like over 50 years, Bhante Sangharakshita and other people they've just like poured lots of teaching and not just teaching, but sort of like experience of them and their how they set about practicing the Dharma. So I feel like I've been given an awful lot, and I'm trying to share as much of it as possible. So particularly, the last 10 years or so since coming back from 3-year retreat, led a lot of retreats. And I've written a few books over the years, nearly all of which are available from Windhorse Publications, I'm delighted to say. But the aim is just to, whether it's by writing or doing residential retreats or online or meeting people individually, in whatever way, just to keep sharing whatever I can that might be useful, so that it keeps on being available and it spreads. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's trying to find the way of both having enough time for my own practice and leading retreats and kind of helping people individually or in small groups with their practice and writing, plus a few other things. It's sort of, it gets to be, it's a bit difficult to balance it all, but it's a nice problem to have. It's a bit of a plate spinning act, if you remember that old thing from the circus with the bamboo poles and the plates. Yeah.
What's writing like for you?
Writing is a mixture. It's, if past experience is anything to go by, supposing I'm starting in on this book about how to practice sadhana. The first draft is usually exciting, although it can be a bit of a struggle just working out how to take what's in my mind, which is like in several different dimensions, and somehow organize it so that it marches across the page from left to right, line after line, in 2 dimensions. That's always a little bit of a struggle. But the first draft, it's usually fun. Then there's the going over it, sort of polishing it. And but I've learned various things over the years. Like, I always reach a point where basically whatever virtues the book has, I've discounted. I know about those. It's just those bits that are left that need fixing, and I haven't got a clue how to fix them. And at that point, I've learned not to just sort of disappear into gloom, because and not to forget that actually there was a lot of good stuff that's already worked, that sort of signed off on. So there are things like that. But I'm a bit perfectionist, and so I have to be careful not to not to try and do the perfect job, particularly as time goes on, to get things out. Okay.
Is there anything else that you want to say while we're having this conversation and talking about Buddhas and human possibility and hopefully awakening, various waking up?
I think we feel like I've been saying quite a bit. My hyperactive throat chakra. I think maybe it's worth saying that within Triratna, because Bhante Sangharakshita, he was so broad and he also really focused on the principles of the Dharma. It does mean that we can follow a lot of different parts of practice and still understand one another's the underlying principles of one another's practice, and it's one of the strengths of the order. I feel one of the things about sadhana is that it's very complete as a practice. So, a full sadhana will include strong emphasis on going for refuge. It will include a strong emphasis on bodhicitta, on not just practicing for ourselves, but really to make a difference to this suffering world. And then it will have both wisdom and heart qualities. It will have imagination. It will have intuition. It will have an impact even on you physically as you go deeper into it. So I find sadhana quite a good sort of touchstone, just to make sure that all the different qualities that we have as human beings are being included in our practice. And because sometimes people, they get very excited about one aspect of the Dharma and sort of run with that, and can even sort of say, well, this is where it's at, and this just doing this, and you can do that other stuff if you really want to, but it's really not too much. So sadhana gives me a real sense of the wholeness of things, and within sadhana, yes, some people really emphasize the wisdom aspect, and some people really emphasize the devotional aspect. But over time, the sadhana keeps sort of nudging you to go, no, let's have something that's even more complete. Let's unfold even more of ourselves here. Let's really have the body and the rational mind and the heart and the intuition and the imagination all unfolding. That's going to be fantastic. Look at that.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I really loved when I first came into contact, well, actually particularly with Triratna, I had some exposure to Zen before, was the sort of warmth and the capaciousness of the Sangha and the kinds of conversations and the recognition that each person in a way unfolds that wholeness on a slightly different looking path of different steps at different times. And one of the things I love about meeting the Buddha's book and engaging in that way is that we're so, for myself, and I see it with other people as well, like I'm drawn to a particular figure, and maybe that figure stays really a vital connection for a long time, but also like we're all heading towards the same wholeness, if you like, and yet it's not a either or, it's not a right or wrong, in that sense. It's not a matter of a kind of dualistic thinking about it. It's about actually all of these qualities will support each other in an awakening. So just the multiplicity of the Buddhas of that world, personally, I just find really beautiful. And it's not often that you get something that introduces people to something of the array. It's not the whole array, is it? But it's a large part of the array, a significant part of the array. Certainly enough of the array to find heart connections or things that are fascinating or opening. So thank you very much for the work then and the work now on bringing out the new Meeting the Buddhas.
Well, thank you very much to you and to Windhorse Publications for all the work that went into this new edition, from new cover to all the work on the text. Yeah, it's been great. As usual, I've really enjoyed working with Windhorse. May we do more in the future.
Indeed. Great. Thank you, Vessantara.
Pleasure.
Windhorse Publications is part of the Triratna Buddhist community, and this podcast is sponsored by Future Dharma Fund, a Buddhist fundraising charity which helps fund Dharma projects across the world, including ours. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider donating to them to help them fund current and future projects like ours. You can find out more about Windhorse Publications by going to our website.